Good evening and welcome. I'm so glad you're able to join us tonight. My name is Ginger Fay, and I am the Global Director of Partnerships at Appleruth. We are an education company, and we strive to help students with whatever goals they have as they make their transitions through their education. Tonight, I am thrilled to be joined by a wonderful dear friend, mentor, and colleague, Dr. Suzanne Wasiolek, and you're going to get to hear a lot of fantastic information from Sue, advice that she has gleaned from 40 years of experience in higher education. That's a lot of time and effort to put into this work, and she's going to give it all to you in the next hour. We invite you to share your questions with us. If there are things that you're wondering about, worrying about as you look ahead towards the transition to college and life beyond, please put your questions in the Q&A box. We'll be glad to cover as many of those as we can tonight. And just as a quick reminder, just the Q&A box is open, not if you're used to using chat on other Zooms. And you also can use the opportunity to use closed captioning if that's something that would be helpful for you. You have that option as well. So thank you all so much for joining us. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Appleruth just to start, just so you know why we do these things. We have a really fundamental belief that when you change a student's self-belief, then you can change what is possible for them in their life. When students believe in themselves, they know what's possible, and they can put the skills and the strengths and the information that they're taught to best use. We just want to be a part of that, and we strive to support students really anywhere on an academic journey. We do three things very well. One is we work with students on academic tutoring. So we work with students anywhere from sort of late elementary school, around third grade, all the way through college. Our tutors love working with students in really specialized fields in their collegiate work. We help students with high stakes test prep for standardized testing like the ACT or SAT, for the GRE if you're applying to grad school, for the SSAT or the IC if you're applying to secondary school. And we also work with students on executive function coaching. So that's the ability to sort of put things together so that you can have the organizational skills to get your work done. So that's what we do, and why we're here tonight is to try and just share some of the good information and ideas that can help students as they prepare for a big transition like going to college. So I was really lucky to be able to share this hour with a wonderful, wonderful colleague. Everyone at Duke knows her as Dean Sue. She is the former Associate Vice President of Student Affairs and Dean of Students at Duke, a place where she worked for over 40 years and has a few degrees from, and is probably, I think, the most well-known fan of the Duke football team, perhaps maybe even the only one. I'm not saying that's true. Not at all. It's a wonderful team, and Sue's been a great supporter of theirs for a really long time. Among many things, she serves as adjunct faculty at Duke and NC State. She's executive in residence at Arcadia University and currently serves as the executive director of EverScout Foundation, which is a neat program that was started by another Duke alumnus. And she is co-author of Getting the Best Out of College, which was written by Sue as a dean, a professor in the political science department, and at the time, a recent graduate of Duke. And my fun fact is that when I worked in the admissions office at Duke, I actually read Ann Crossman's application when she applied to transfer from Stanford. And I had Peter Fever as a professor, and Sue as a great colleague and mentor. So I recommend this book really highly because it's got a lot of really great advice. And so I'm going to let Sue share some of her advice from the experiences that she's had and gleaned from helping lots of students through this really important transition. So Sue, take us away.
Thank you so much, Ginger. You know, it's interesting that you've mentioned a couple of times that I was at Duke and in higher education for over 40 years. And I think that's just your nice way of saying that I'm really old. But I want to sort of send that back in your direction because, yes, Ann Crossman is someone for whom you may have read her application to Duke. Her first child is preparing to go to college. So that probably makes you a little older too.
That was saying. So sweet of you to mention. Thank you.
Just saying, had to say that. Yeah, you all learned during our time together this evening that Ginger and I have known each other for a long, long, long time. And there's a lot of love in that relationship. So at least I think there is. Ginger, could you go back to the slide just to show this book really quickly? Yeah, there we go. I hate to put this book out there because frankly, it was in a second printing back in 2012, and we did not do a third edition. Some of us would love to have done one. We may still do a third edition, but I want you all to know I'm not trying to sell this book because frankly, you can't really find it. You might find a couple copies on Amazon or something like that. I don't even think it's a collector's item right now, but I sometimes feel like if people have written a book, it means that maybe they know a little bit of something, and I want you to feel like I know a little bit of something tonight. So I thought I'd throw this book out there. One of the things that the book does do in the next slide, in the next couple of slides, is just sort of show you some of the things to expect. And these are the same things people have expected for years in going to college. So, it is a new home. It does require quite a significant transition, living with a roommate, perhaps, leaving home for some for the first time. How do you deal with communicating with mom and dad and parents and family and siblings? How do you put a class schedule together? How do you decide what you're going to do outside of the classroom? All of these things are still issues for college students. Again, I'm not trying to sell the book. I'm really not, but I'm really trying to point out here that as folks get ready to make that transition to college, there have been and probably always will be certain challenges and certain little speed bumps that people have to think about, plan for, strategize about. And the next slide will show you that not only do you have to transition to this new home, but you have to figure out how you're going to study, how you're going to deal with professors, how you're going to get to know them. What are they like? Why are they different than other people? How are you going to negotiate social life and making friends and this notion of studying and people from all around the world and different people from you, being your roommate, living in a residence hall, taking classes with you? How is all of that going to be navigated? And then finally, the third part of the book really focuses on what happens when you need help in college. And I think one of the most important things is that students, and this has been true for generations, students recognize probably relatively early on that they may need some help in a variety of areas, but they delay. They delay getting the help, and sometimes they delay a little bit too late. We do have a chapter in this book, and again, I'm not trying to sell the book. I don't know why I keep saying that, but I'm not. I do think that there are times when it makes great sense for folks to not go to college right after high school, to take a gap year. COVID really pointed that out to us. And if you look at the number of students who took that gap year between high school and college during COVID, that number went up enormously. And my hope is that people now recognize that there can be some great benefit in taking a break. Not only taking a break before going to college, but actually taking a break during college, getting off the treadmill, recognizing that, yes, it is a marathon where you can stop, at a water station and take a break is a really important thing to do. But for those who do continue to go or take a break and come back, the question is, how are we going to choose a major? What is that going to look like in terms of my career? What is the relationship between a major and a career? And I could actually talk about that single question for about an hour. And then the book concludes with just preparing for life after college. And I just use this framework to sort of talk about what folks can anticipate. Probably not very different than many of the parents or other family members who might be on this webinar right now. These are the same kinds of things that we all went through when we were transitioning and dealing with the college experience. But there are a number of things that have made the experience different than it has been over the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years. But at the heart of it all, I would say, are still some challenges that students have. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about what some of those challenges might look like. There is stress. We hear about stress all the time. We hear about anxiety. But my experience and my observations have been over the years that there are three things that cause an awful lot of stress for college students. And this, in some ways, may be true for high school students, and it may be even true for those of us who have finished college and then trying to figure out what the next step is going to be. But number one is just figuring out our schedules. How can we get it all done? And for those young people who are leaving home for the first time, who are not going to have someone waking them up in the morning, someone telling them when to go to school, someone telling them when to get their work done, that number one challenge of keeping an eye on the clock and getting it all done is one of the greatest, I think, sources of stress. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. Deciding what to major in. And if anybody has any questions about later on, we can try to fit that in. That's not going to be the focus of my remarks tonight, but we can talk about what it means to pick a major these days and what relationship it has to ultimately number three, what do I want to do and who do I want to be and when I grow up. And we know, those of us who think we are still in the process of growing up, we know that, frankly, we never do. And the number of times that people change jobs today, change careers completely, can't change their focus, is changing very, very rapidly. And so our major and what we study will have relevance to what we end up doing, but perhaps not as much as we might anticipate. So we'll talk a little bit about stress too and how to deal with that. And maybe I'll give you a few little pointers that might help you in your stress. So college is so many opportunities, so many choices. For those of you who haven't listened to the TED Talk or read the book by Barry Schwartz, The Paradox of Choice, he talks about how the more choices we have, frankly, the more stressed out we get. And then you add that to the fear of missing out on those opportunities that we don't pick. And then you add, as I mentioned earlier, all of this unstructured time. It's just no big surprise that it's going to land in this area of stress. And I want to move on from stress because there's so much more to college than stress, but I also want to normalize it. I want to make certain that people understand that stress is just part of a normal life. And frankly, there's a healthy amount of stress. The question is, how do we deal with stress? And I was involved in a project for over 5 years when I was at Duke that really looked at that question, not just the question of how do we deal with stress, but who are the most resilient students in college? And frankly, I have to tell you, I think the results of this project not only relate to college students, but I think they relate to all of us. And I have actually used the results of this study in my day-to-day kinds of decision-making. And when I'm feeling like I'm not approaching life in the way that I need to, I call on what I'm going to share with you about this resilience project. And it was a longitudinal study. It went on for 5 years, and we looked at students during their freshman year. We may have looked at a group of juniors, then we may have looked at a group of students over their entire 4-year period of time and followed them the whole time. We really focused at the end of the project on the senior year. But again, at the end of the day, looking at all of the data, here are the results of the project. And let me tell you a little bit more. Let me just tell you this before we get to the results of the project. The project really did focus on resilience. Resilience meaning that ability to hit a speed bump and go over it and really figure out how to deal with the adversity and any kind of challenging circumstances that we have in life, which is frankly different than adapting to change and adapting to new conditions. So we didn't study adaptability, but I feel it's really important to mention it here because students have to adapt. We all have to adapt. Things are constantly changing. But that adaptation to the college experience, particularly that first semester and that first year, is pretty enormous. I'm teaching a freshman seminar right now at Duke, and I am reminded each and every class, and I just finished teaching this afternoon, each and every class just how challenging that transition can be. But once that transition takes place, the challenges, the difficult circumstances are going to continue to happen as they do throughout life. And the question is, what makes for a resilient college student? So just to give you another clarification and definition of what resilience is, you can see in that first bullet, I think we've already talked about that, just dealing with all of these challenges. We hear a lot of different words right now: resilience, we hear grit, we hear well-being. I don't care what you call it. It's just this notion of bouncing back and being able to pick yourself back up when you really feel like things are down. And college students need to be resilient. And this is what our project showed us. I think we're getting into it. Oh, a little bit more about the project. Just so you know, Ginger is managing these slides for me. And I really do know what the slides say. I just don't have in front of me what order they're in. But you can see here that the Duke Family Endowment funded this project to the tune of $3.4 million. I'm proud to say that tonight you are getting the results of this project free, and you can decide whether it's all worth $3.4 million. But it was quite an extensive project, more than 5,000 data points. We could still look at all this data today, and we could probably be looking at this data for years to come. But we've done what we wanted to do with the data, at least up to this point. There were 4 colleges that participated. Davidson, which is a small liberal arts college in North Carolina, Duke University, which is a research institution in Durham, North Carolina, which is not a basketball school. It is, as Ginger meant to say, a football school. Johnson C. Smith University, which is an historically Black school in Charlotte, North Carolina, and Furman University, which is a small liberal arts university in Greenville, South Carolina. These are the 4 higher education institutions that the Duke Family Endowment is willing to fund. They don't do any research in higher education outside of these 4 institutions. As I mentioned earlier, periodic and longitudinal surveys. And what was really interesting and cool about this study is that there were many, many, many students who actually released their individual personal data involving their academic achievements, their student health records, and their counseling records. So we were able to look at students in a very holistic way, at least the ones that were willing to release their personal data. So I think the results of this project are very rich, and hopefully they will be very helpful to you as soon as we get to the results. I feel like I'm on one of those videos where it says, you know, just keep watching, it's coming, it's coming. Well, it is coming. In any event, there are 4 pillars. So all 5,000 plus data points were pretty much funneled into these 4 foundational pillars of resilience. And the first one is probably the hardest one to tackle, probably the hardest one to learn. And that is this notion of self-control or self-regulation. So students who were able to score high in this area of self-control or self-regulation also scored really high on this measurement of resilience. These are students who are able to start a project, finish a project, and frankly, do it in a way that they were able to maintain some semblance of well-being. One of the old research projects that was done that really illustrates this notion of self-regulation is the marshmallow test. And I don't know if any of you remember the marshmallow test. I'll tell you what's wrong with the test first, and then I'll tell you what the research showed. But I'll actually do it in reverse. I'll tell you what the research showed. They put some 4-year-olds in a room. They did this for a long period of time. And they gave the 4-year-olds, I think it was 4-year-olds, a marshmallow. And they told the 4-year-old, if you can resist the temptation to eat this marshmallow before I come back in the room, I'll give you a second one. And this was this whole study of whether these 4-year-olds could self-regulate. Could they control themselves? Could they avoid the temptation of eating the first marshmallow and then just give up the right to get the second marshmallow? And they followed folks for a long period of time and realized, even with adults, that this whole concept of really being able to regulate decisions, regulate priorities, it's not just a matter of time management. It's really knowing what to do and when to do it. So procrastination is not something that one would sort of put into this category of self-control. Procrastinators are not as good at self-regulating as others. But what they found out about these marshmallow resistors is that many of them told them decades later that the reason they didn't eat the first marshmallow was that they didn't like marshmallows. So it's a great illustration of self-control and self-regulation, but I'm not sure the research was really, really good. I usually tell students when I'm explaining this concept of self-control is you have an opportunity to go to a party on a Wednesday night. You know that you have a big project due on Friday. If you stay home on Wednesday, work on the project, get a good night's sleep on Wednesday, get up on Thursday, go to your classes, work on the project again on Thursday, turn it in on Friday, feeling well rested, well nutritioned, exercise, you're doing all your normal things, but you've given yourself enough time to get your project done, then you can go and socialize and go to a party on Friday or Saturday, as opposed to the person who decides to go to that party on Wednesday night, feels pretty lousy on Thursday, sort of trudges their way through all day Thursday classes, stays up again too late on Thursday night, is not eating well, is highly caffeinated, and then turns in the project on Friday and may actually turn in a pretty good project, but has really taken a toll on their physical and mental health. That is what we're looking for to avoid with this concept of self-regulation and really trying to help students prioritize. This is a tough one. It's hard to achieve this and to suddenly become this kind of person without recognizing and being self-aware that you need to work on it. But it is a characteristic of resilient people. Number 2, this one you can work on. And we can all start working on this one right now. It doesn't matter how old or young you are. But if you are a student out there or a parent of a student right now, this notion of self-compassion and not beating yourself up after you fail or you think you failed, or after you feel like you have more problems than others, or you haven't handled something well, a relationship goes sour, you have enormous regrets. This constant, excessive mindset of self-criticizing. People who are resilient don't do that. They look in the mirror and they say, I'm okay, I'm good, I'm enough. And they treat themselves during these difficult times just as they would treat a friend. If a friend is down and out and really experiencing difficulties or problems, you don't say to them, you really are a loser. You really, you failed. You know what? You're a total failure. But those are the kinds of things that we say to ourselves when we are struggling. And people who are able to turn that language into a language of self-compassion and self-love and self-healing are those that are able to be resilient. And we can always work on this. And it's something that we can change about ourselves. So I think just sharing this notion and telling, I think when we tell people, you would never say that to a friend. Why would you say that to yourself? Why would you do that? So treat yourself as you would a loved one or a friend. Self-compassion, self-control equals at least the first 2 pillars of resilience. Number 3. This is a biggie. And again, I think it's probably true whether we are in high school, middle school, frankly, elementary school, in college, or if we are approaching and sort of attacking our work. It's this notion of engagement. Frankly, really loving what we do and feeling a sense of gusto for our work. I will share with you that when I was growing up, neither my mom nor dad went to college. In fact, I think my dad got kicked out of 8th grade by the nuns. He was a good guy, though, I promise you he was. My mom finished high school, but when they went to work each day, for them, work was a 4-letter word. It was drudgery. They didn't wake up every morning really anticipating with excitement and passion what they were going to be doing that day. And many of us might not do it right now. We may have work that we really don't like to do. It's something that we need to do or whatever. But when we're in college, we actually have the option and the opportunity to pick what we want to study. Many schools have general curricular requirements. We have to sort of get through those. But at the end of the day, most schools say major in something. And we're not going to tell you what that is. You get to pick what you love to study. And this is where we also tie into my my other webinar, which we're not going to do tonight, but which is what you actually major in doesn't have much of a connection to what your career actually is. It does if you're an engineer, and it probably does if you're a nurse or if you're a teacher, but otherwise, so much of what you study ends up being connected to whatever it is we do in life. But the bottom line is, if you want to be resilient and successful in college, you ought to be studying something that you really like. You should be anticipating with absolute joy and excitement going to class. Now, that may sound like a true foreign concept to many of you, but I can tell you there are many, many, many students today who are able to achieve this, and they truly find something that they love. You will notice that under the important segment here, that finding that work in college with which you can be engaged leads to greater feelings of belonging, lower levels of stress, lower levels of mental health challenges, and it also leads to higher GPAs and just overall better well-being. Students should not study something because they think someone else believes they should be doing this, or they believe that it's going to get them a good job, or they believe that it's the right thing or the necessary thing to do. What they pick to study and being engaged in their academic work is one of the most important things that they can do that will lead them to a successful college career and will lead them to being a resilient college student. And finally, number 4, relationships. And there are really 2 kinds of relationships that the resilience study showed that students need to be very intentional about and work towards while they are in college. The first is peers. Peer relationships are really, really important. They're important in all aspects and all stages of our lives. But it's not as easy to do in college as I think some students think. Many students leave high school with great friends. They've had these friends for a long, long period of time. They've had these relationships that they've worked on. Some students have gone to the same school, K through 12. They've been with the same group of students for years and years and years. And now suddenly they get thrown into a college environment and they're on their own once again to make friends, and they forget how to do it. The pandemic has not helped this. And the students who are in college right now, who are just coming, have expressed, at least to me, and I know to others, that this is a talent, a skill that they are having to find all over again. What the study showed was it's not the number of friends that you have, it's not the breadth of friendships, but it's really the depth. And having 1 or 2 really, really good friends is much more important in college than having a whole lot of friends. It is important to have a number of good acquaintances in college and get to know a diverse group of students, but having a few peers with whom you can always rely on and do some of the more important kinds of things, even whether it's going out to dinner or studying or just sharing concerns. Really, really important. But what is equally important, and frankly, probably for some students even more important, is to have at least one really meaningful, what I will call an adult relationship. We do consider our college students to be adults, but the faculty members, the staff members, the administrators, the folks who live in their residence halls, the housekeepers, the bus drivers, the dining hall workers, the folks who help them in the gym, the folks who surround them on their college campus are there for a particular reason. And many of them, and I hope all of them, frankly, are there because they love working with students. And the ones that are truly student facing are there to help the students and to have those relationships. I don't want to get all gushy here, and all personal. But my relationship with Ginger when she was a student at Duke was enormously meaningful to me. I imagine that she felt the same way. I am the godmother for one of her sons. And that, that's why I did what I did for 40 years, is to be able to have that kind of meaningful relationship with students. And you can't have that with every student, but every person on a college campus can have a meaningful relationship with a student or more students. But the student really has to at least take that step to create that. I will tell you that there are some schools that have a lot of programs in place to make this easier to happen. They have research opportunities for students to engage with faculty members. They find a faculty member who is studying, climate change, or they're finding faculty members who are studying the law in some way, or medicine. What an incredible way to get to know a faculty member by engaging with them on a research project. But it does require that the student reach out to that faculty member and say, I'm interested in what you're doing. I'd like to work with you. I can't tell you, I know of any faculty member who would refuse that student. We like to work with students who are working with or are interested in our own research. There are also programs where students are incentivized to invite a faculty member to lunch, where the school actually pays for the faculty member's lunch to go out with a student. But again, it requires the student to reach out to that faculty member. And they don't have to do it alone. They could do it with a friend, with a classmate. 2 or 3 students can go out to lunch with a faculty member. That relationship with that adult on the college campus is key to students developing resilience, to being healthier, to being more successful, to feeling a greater sense of belonging and a lower level of loneliness, and to also experiencing just overall better health and well-being. So the peer relationships are important, but so is that relationship with someone of an adult age on the campus. So self-control. Oh, thank you, Ginger. We can go to the next one. Yeah, please. Thank you. We actually surveyed students to see how this kind of instruction and information helped them. We also gave students some very clear tools on how to develop some of these skills, particularly the self-compassion and the self-regulation, self-control. For example, one skill that we have given students a lot, and some of you may do this on a daily basis, is a practice of meditation. There is a specific but very general breath awareness meditation that we teach college students. It's called Koru, K-O-R-U. You can actually Google it and look it up. But what makes it special is that it teaches students to meditate about 10 minutes a day. That's it. Simply 10 minutes a day, even if they do 5. it will be very, very helpful. And we give them all different kinds of ways that they can actually meditate. We also suggest to them that they write down, and we'll see a slide on this in just a second, but that they write down 2 things each day for which they are grateful. And when we resurveyed students and asked them, did the meditation help? Did expressing some feelings of gratitude on a daily basis, did that in fact provide you with better opportunities to develop those 4 pillars that we just went over? And you will see that this is what we found when we surveyed those students, that it really did work. That having a mindfulness practice, having meditation, thinking about gratitude, knowing these 4 pillars, trying to focus on these 4 pillars, trying to practice self-compassion, trying to figure out how to be have more self-control, and really focusing on meaningful relationships. This is what they reported. The percentage of students that reported they were helped by this in a significant way. So you can see it works. I haven't just given you $3.4 or $5 million worth of research that has sat on a shelf and has not been purposeful. Just mention the power of gratitude. I will just share with you, and it is kind of hokey and silly, but it's been very helpful for me. I was taught from a very early age to write thank you notes, and I write them all the time. I don't send thank you emails unless it's of a timely nature, but actually sitting and writing, and I think it's a lost art. When I get a thank you note, for example, from my godson, it is enormously meaningful to me. But what's even more meaningful to me is writing a thank you note to somebody. And I think if we can get students to do this, children to do this, young folks to do this at an early age, and if it has to be via email or text, so be it. But really expressing gratitude has been shown by all kinds of research to contribute to our own resilience and our own well-being. So those are my remarks. I know that we have time for some questions, and I am ready to answer questions about anything. I'm happy to talk about majors in college if that would help. I do want to say that I was impressed with Ginger's opening remarks about what Apple Ruth is all about and what it's trying to do. And I think what I heard from her comments and what I want to reemphasize is that all of us entering this arena of going to college as parents, as supportive parents, and as college students, doing so with a growth mindset and really believing that we can learn, we can change, we can develop these kinds of traits is incredibly important. And I'm really pleased that that is sort of the foundational principle of what you're doing at Apple Ruth.
And it continues. Everything you taught me continues in the work that I do today, and I feel very, very grateful for it. And I'll write you a thank you note, and I'll get Doyle to do one too.
Thank you. I'll be expecting that in the mail very soon.
We do have lots of great questions from the audience. We also want to ask you a question. So we're going to post a quick poll just to get to know a little bit about those of you who are here. Are you parents or guardians supporting students? Are you a student going through this process yourself? Are you educators like us? Where is that student in the process? We know most of you are actually college students at this point. So this is a poll that we use all the time, and it may not be as relevant for those of you tonight.
I don't see a category for your mother. Is she under parent guardian? Is that what she answers?
Well, she is also an educator,
Oh,
so I
that's
mean, she
right.
may,
Yep.
she's going to have to, and she's a lifelong student, so she's going to have to make a tough choice there with
Under
like,
number one. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. All
that's
right.
Maureen's choice. So we'll love to hear from you all a little bit more about you, and we want to hear your questions and concerns, and we're going to try and get through a few of those if we can tonight. So the first question I think is an interesting one because we haven't talked about this at all. What are your thoughts about college-bound kids waiving their FERPA rights? So one of the things you may not know is that Sue is, among many other things, a recovering attorney. So some of you may not be familiar with what FERPA is. So I'm going to let Sue explain it, and I'm happy to add any 2 cents I can from the admissions process. But this parent is specifically asking so they can keep an eye on their child's academic progress in college. So I think it might be helpful to just sort of clarify what FERPA covers and what it doesn't in response to that question. So if we can start there.
Yeah, and every school deals with FERPA a little bit differently. And you can read FERPA differently depending on how you frankly wish to interpret it. FERPA is the Family Education Right to Privacy Act. I think I got it pretty close. My generation knew it as the Buckley Amendment. It's actually been in place, I think, since 1974. And this
That
particular
is exactly right. You get 100% so far.
Well, I did pass the bar, you know. Anyway, I could never pass it today. But the amendment, the law came forward because students really felt as though they should be treated as adults. They were 18 years old. They were at the age of majority, most of them. And even if they weren't, the fact that they were in college and living away from home, many of them, meant that they should not be under the wing of their parents and under the tutelage and watchful eye of their parents any longer, and they should be on their own. And so this law evolved as a privacy act, saying that, you know, parents didn't just automatically have access to their child's record, whether they were paying the bills or not. And again, every school interprets it slightly differently. There is this there's this information called directory information. Some schools deal with that directory information: name, address, dates of enrollment, major. If you're an athlete, directory information includes your height, your weight, all of those things. But many schools say that directory information can be shared with anyone. But every school defines directory information a little bit differently. Some schools will say, we're going to automatically just send out grades for our freshmen. And students might say, well, that's against FERPA. Again, you know, there can be challenges to the law, but every school is a little different in terms of how they interpret FERPA. There is a phrase within FERPA that says that private information can be shared for health and safety reasons or emergency situations. Again, how do you define that? And it also says that I, for example, as the dean of students, if I were the dean of students at a school and had information about a student, I can share it on a need to know basis with my colleagues. So again, it's all over the place. What a lot of schools are doing is asking students that if they wish to share certain information with parents, like grades, you can even sign a waiver at some schools for medical information to be released. Some people consider counseling information to be under FERPA, some consider it to be under HIPAA and actually health related. So again, it's all over the place. But what schools are doing is saying, if you, student, want your parent to have access to this information, sign a waiver and we will then routinely release it to them. Some schools are saying to students, you don't have to sign a waiver. We're just going to allow you to give it's not really a password, but access to the record, your academic record through whatever computer system that the school is using. This is a really personal decision that you've got to make. Why is it that you feel you want to know the academic progress of your son or daughter. If you were to ask them point blank, how are they doing? Is it that you aren't necessarily going to trust their answer? And you feel this need to sort of follow behind them to see how they're doing? If you were to have a conversation with them before they left for college and talked about this, what would that conversation look like? And do you feel comfortable having that conversation right now? A lot of students would say, absolutely, I just want to waive my right. I want my parents to know my grades. I'd rather them be able to have access to them and see them without me even having to tell them. And other students are going to say, actually, I'd like to be able to start to develop a sense of independence. And part of that involves me not signing that waiver. So I'm not sure what the question was, Ginger. Should they sign a waiver? Should they ask? But that's sort of, I'm just answering the general question about FERPA and
I think that was really helpful. I would add two things, if I may. One is if you have a child who has a medical condition, or whether that's a physical condition or a mental health condition, and you want to be able to be engaged in their healthcare while they're in college, you can, with your child's permission, do a medical power of attorney. So that's a good conversation to have before your child goes to college, if that's something they think would be helpful, and that you want to partner on that while they're in college. There's a company called Mama Bear Legal that has all that paperwork kind of put together for you, and you just have to get it notarized if that's something that would be right for your family. And I agree so much with Sue about the importance of having the conversation ahead of time as a family about how you're going to transition to this new kind of relationship, and what your hopes and expectations are. I have worked in college admissions and college counseling for a long time. So I work a lot with students who are going through the transition to college. And one of the things that I remind students and parents is that every scholarship I know of has strings attached to it. There are, some GPA requirements. You have to major in this, that, or the other thing, or you have to have this background before you can apply. The family scholarship, which is to say whatever financial support you provide to your own children, can also have strings attached to it too. That can be a conversation that you have, but you need to have it before college begins. And so if part of what your support requires is access to information, then have that conversation as a family before you begin, so everybody knows what the deal is before you start. There's some really important and helpful conversations, I think, for students and parents to have as they embark on this very new part of their relationship and transition to adulting together.
Yeah, I really appreciate that answer, Ginger. I wanted to say something about the medical power of attorney. The benefit of doing that is that it is in place, and it's going to be, I think, interpreted by most schools legally as a general kind of release. Whereas, and it's not going to have to be renewed. Whereas, as some schools are going to ask each and every time for the student to sign a release of a medical record related to whatever the condition is at the time, if that makes sense. So the student goes in, for example, to student health, and the student says, I would like to give you permission to talk to my parent. They can sign a release then, but they're going to have to sign it again the next time they go for the other condition, if that makes sense. So whereas with the power of attorney, it's going to be in place.
Thank you for that. How should we handle imposter syndrome?
Tough question. Great question. I wish I could give a great answer to that question, because I continue myself to have imposter syndrome. It depends on the circumstances. It depends on, I'm feeling some right now, not being able to answer this question about imposter syndrome. I'm like, oh my God, maybe I am an imposter. Maybe I shouldn't even be on this webinar. Maybe I shouldn't be trying to answer this question. But I think
Sue, would you please offer yourself real compassion? That's
I am.
not what you
It's
would say to
exactly,
me.
I know, it's exactly, well, I actually would to you, Jen. I'm just kidding. Yeah. I think it does get back to, and I think there's a question a little bit later on that's related to this as well.
Yes.
These pillars, particularly the self-control and the self-compassion, should be practiced all the time by all of us. And we should remind each other, we should remind our kids, our children should remind us when we're not exhibiting that self-compassion. And I think that it's one of the most powerful things that we can do is to forgive ourselves. Forgiveness is an incredible healer. And we not only forgive others, but we forgive ourselves. And I think just talking about it and reminding ourselves about it within our families, and just pointing out when we're not being self-compassionate, that is, I think, something that folks can do all the time, every day, before college, during college, after college. And I think that that is fully and completely related to this notion of imposter syndrome. We expect each other and ourselves to do our very best. That's it. And that's what we're doing. We're doing our best. And that's what I'm doing right now. I'm doing my best, and no regrets.
Agreed. So let's take that other question that is related. Someone is mentioning that their son suffers from severe self-doubt and panics when he bombs a test. What kind of help would you recommend for a student in that situation, or a parent trying to support that student?
Yeah, I'm going to sort of address that almost in a backwards way, and ask, why did he bomb the test? I know that sounds odd and weird, but if this is someone that you believe is a very capable, prepared student, and they bomb the test, that takes me down one road. If this is a student who may have not prepared as thoroughly and as properly as they should have, that would take me down another road. But this notion of self-doubt, just looking at that alone is also this, I think, related very much to self-compassion. So let's assume that your son has studied really hard, really well, but just enters the testing with this self-doubt and then doesn't do well. I think for him, the greatest help that he can get is just trying to take some time to talk with a professional about where that doubt is coming from. What is he doubting about himself? And I think also just you showing him ongoing and constant self-compassion, and you not reinforcing that doubt that he has about himself. I don't know if that makes sense, and I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah, I'll stop there.
I think that's helpful. I think your sort of spin to ask the question, sort of where's the doubt coming from,
Mm-hmm.
or does he think he's bombed, or has he really bombed? And everyone's definition of bombing is
Different,
right? I mean, some people are rejoicing over a 76, and other people are really disappointed about it. I think it all depends on whether that was in Calc 41. Just asking for a friend. But I think that notion of where does that come from, I think that's incredibly helpful. One of the things we do at Apple Ruth a great deal is work with students who have test anxiety, because there are some students who kind of know the material and they know it, and something happens when they walk into a testing environment. It's high stakes and the anxiety level comes up and they can't do it. They can't do what they're really capable of. And so we help them develop some habits and skills so that they can practice that and bring that anxiety level back down so the information can come out. So I think getting to the root of what's going on is probably really great advice for that family. Okay, so we have 5 minutes and we have a lot more questions. So lightning round. Do you know of any research that talks about a student majoring in something that someone else chose for them, not working out in terms of their career success? This is an educator who has maybe some families they're working with that are kind of want a particular major, maybe a major that sounds like a job, and they want to be able to show those families some evidence that letting your child follow their interest and passion is a good outcomes.
It's a great question. Lightning round answer. I don't know of any research. It may be out there. I'm just not familiar with it, but I can tell you there's plenty of research out there on how it affects someone's overall physical and mental well-being. So they may be enormously successful in their career, but personally and otherwise, they are struggling enormously. So successful career, but not a particularly happy and successful life.
Thank you. A hypothetical question for a 12th grader who is not feeling ready for college. What advice would you give that student? What do you think they should do? Should they take a mulligan on 12th grade? Should they take a gap year? Should they start a community college? Should they just bite the bullet and go because that's what everyone else is doing and you don't know what else to do? What's your thought?
Yeah, I think one of the worst things that a student can do is go to college if they don't feel ready. And I'm not sure what's meant by unprepared. I don't know if that means unprepared academically, unprepared socially, just unprepared emotionally, maybe all of the above. But I think this is a perfect time for this student to either ask the question, should I go back and redo the 12th grade? Because I think I would do it better. I'd like to tackle it again. I don't mean to equate life to a video game, but that's what we do. That's what kids do in video games. They just keep playing until they get better at it and they feel more comfortable. So I think it's a question, does the student feel like going back is going to help them? Or is it going to be better for this student to maybe start slowly in a community college setting, to take a course or two while perhaps working and ease into this notion of the next step towards college? There is no right way to do this and one way to do this. And that's the thing that is the most frustrating to me in higher education. And that is people just keep going because that's what they think they need to do. And I wish that we would require each and every student to take at least a gap year, if not 2 gap years, and do something else before they start college. I would suggest to you that there are many students who are not prepared, and they go and it is difficult. So again, I think repeating could be right. But if they don't feel prepared, the one thing I can tell you is don't go.
I have worked with lots of students over the years who've taken gap years. I don't know anyone who's ever regretted it. I know also a lot of students who took what I call the accidental gap year because they started at college before they were ready and their parents made a very generous, unwitting donation to the university they started at and then left with no credits from. So take your time. It doesn't have to happen between 18 and 22. And a postgraduate year could be a good sort of in-between option for a student who needs a little more seasoning, needs a little more practice and another go at high school. Can you give us one little tidbit about choosing a major, and then we'll invite you back for another webinar where we just talk about that?
Yeah, choosing a major, the student should spend as much time during their first and second year taking as many different things as they possibly can and actually exploring all the possibilities of a major and not going in anticipating that they know exactly what they may want to major in or expecting that they need to know that. So making certain that they are in an exploratory mindset in choosing a major. That's my nickel answer.
Thank you.
I do have a dollar answer,
We'll
but
try and
that's
get
my
a whole
nickel.
dollar next time. So
Okay.
tune in for our next webinar with Dean Sue. We are so grateful to you, Sue, for sharing your advice and insights and giving us this incredible bargain, $3 million worth of research for absolutely nothing but an hour's worth of our time. If we can be of help to you at Appleruth with academic tutoring, standardized test prep, or executive function coaching, I hope you'll let us know how we can help. One of the things we do for students who are interested in learning a little bit more about EF coaching is to start with a diagnostic package, which enables you to kind of learn a little bit more about how you learn so that you can harness your strengths and compensate for opportunities. So if we can be of help to you with that, I hope you will let us know. Sue, I want to let you leave us with one piece of advice. How do you think parents can best support young adults in thinking about these great practices and these habits of resilience? I think about when I was a freshman at Duke. I wish I had known all the things that you taught me once I got there. And was lucky enough to get to know you, as my dad said, for the good reasons, because you can get to know Dean Sue for other reasons too. So if you could have told mini me a little piece of advice or advice for my parents at trying to support me as I started college, what would that one little nugget you want to be leaving us with?
I don't know that it would be what I would have told you then, but this is what I would tell you now. And this
or
is
what
what
you
I
would tell CJ. He'll start
this is
college
what I would
next year.
tell CJ
That's my
right now. That's what I would tell you to be helping CJ learn to do. And that is just some of the very simple adult things in life. How do you make a doctor's appointment? How do you do that for yourself? And there are so many of those things. I know that, you've taken your children to the grocery store many times, but how do you decide what to buy? What are you looking for when you buy? And how do you decide, frankly, on a day-to-day basis, what you're going to do some days and what you're not going to do other days? How do you decide when you're paying your bills and how you pay your bills? And I know that sounds crazy, but and if you're going to give them a credit card when they go to college, if they're going to have a bank account, which I think they all still should, how do you manage it? So these are some, I know it sounds crazy because I hear from a lot of parents all the time. That's stuff that I can help them with. I can do that for them. I don't need for them to be distracted from their studies and from their work and from their social life to have to do these other things. And I'm like, those are things that are as important for them to learn as their academic work.
Thank you, Sue. I think that's a great advice. I'm so grateful to you for the legions of students at Duke and NC Central and NC State and Arcadia and all the other places where you have lent your time and talents. All of us are who we are in some part because of the generosity with which you have shared everything you have learned hard and easy ways yourself. And so thank you very much for that. And thank you for this hour and this great advice and conversation. I am grateful to you. Thank you note coming. And we'll look forward to hearing from students and families when we can be of help to them here at Appleruth. And stay tuned for Sue's next webinar. We've got the next one lined up. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you all.